Hello, benchwarmers, and welcome again to the Bench Report. You're listening to Amy and Ivan. Today we're doing a deep dive into something, well, pretty concerning that's hitting UK universities right now. We're talking about the serious financial challenges they're facing and what that means for jobs in higher education.
That's right. And we've been digging into a recent parliamentary debate on this very topic. It's a great source because you get, multiple viewpoints, MPs from different sides raising their concerns, gives a real rounded picture.
Exactly, not
Okay.
just one single take. Our mission here really is to cut through some of the complexity. We want to pull out the key things you need to know from that debate, what's actually going on, why it's happening, and frankly, why it matters, without getting bogged down.
For sure. We'll look at the scale of the job cuts being talked about, and it is significant. We'll also cover the reasons behind the financial squeeze, the knock-on effects for students, for the economy, and of course, touch on some of the solutions being floated and the problems with those too.
So maybe let's start with the scale, because some of the numbers are quite startling.
They really are. The debate highlighted, I think, over 5,000 job cuts already announced.
Already announced, wow.
And some projections are suggesting that could climb potentially to over 10,000 just this year.
10,000,
Yeah.
that's huge. That's not just trimming budgets, is it?
No, it points to something much more systemic. And there was modeling mentioned from the Office for Students. They're projecting that nearly three-quarters, almost 75% of English universities could be in deficit by, 2025, 26?
Three-quarters in deficit, that's just around the corner.
It is. It shows how widespread the underlying financial problems might be becoming.
And the debate didn't just talk in hypotheticals, did it? There were specific universities named.
Oh, absolutely. Very specific examples. The University of Bedfordshire was mentioned looking at over 200 job cuts.
Yeah.
University of Dundee potentially facing almost 700 jobs at risk. That's a massive number for one institution.
700.
Brunel University, too, facing, I think it was 125 academic staff plus another 239 other staff redundancy. So over 360 people.
And these are real people, real expertise walking out the door.
Precisely. And it continues. Bournemouth possibly facing 200 redundancies, suspending 15 courses.
Suspending courses, too.
University of East Anglia, maybe 190 staff losses. University of York, they've already seen 273 leave recently. It just goes on.
It sounds like a wave washing over the sector. There was even mention of a website tracking this.
Yes, the UKHE shrinking page. It's run by Queen Mary University and the University and College Union, the UCU. They're trying to keep a running tally of redundancies, restructures, closures. A bit grim, but necessary, I suppose, to see the full picture.
A central place to track it all. Okay, so the scale is clearly massive. What did the debate say about why this is happening? What are the drivers?
Well, it seems like a perfect storm, really. Multiple factors converging. A big one mentioned repeatedly was tuition fees for home students.
Right, the £9,250 cap hasn't changed in England for years.
Exactly. And inflation means the actual value of that fee income has been falling sharply since 2015-16. It's apparently approaching its lowest real terms level since way back in 1997. So universities are getting less money per student, effectively.
Well, their costs are going up.
Precisely. Rising operational costs were another major point. Things like energy prices, which have hit everyone, but also increases in things like national insurance contributions. That alone reportedly cost the University of Dundee an extra £3 million.
Wow, so income down, costs up. That's the squeeze.
A classic squeeze. And then a really significant driver that came up again and again, international students.
Ah, yes. The numbers there have been falling.
Dramatically, in some cases mentioned, University of Bedfordshire, again, they apparently went from over 5,000 international students in 2023, projected down to just over 2,000 by 2025.
That's more than halved. The income from that must be huge.
It is. International fees are much higher. And the University of Essex also reported big drops, 47% fewer EU students post-Brexit, and a 40% drop in overall international numbers. And they explicitly linked that overall drop to changes in government visa policy.
Right, the crackdown on student visas, dependents, that sort of thing.
Yes. It seems the debate really connected those policy decisions, stemming partly from Brexit and the current government stance, directly to the financial pain universities are feeling. Even though, historically, international students brought in, over $40 billion?
It does seem counterintuitive, economically speaking.
It raises questions about the strategy, definitely. And it's not just England. Scotland was mentioned, too.
What's the situation there?
Well, the debate pointed out that government investment in Scottish universities is apparently 22% lower than it was back in 2013-14.
So funding pressure's there, too, just maybe from a different angle.
Seems so. And the broader UK context is that, compared to other developed nations in the OECD, we have one of the lowest shares of public funding going into higher education. We rely much more heavily on fees and loans.
Which makes the sector vulnerable when those fee streams, especially international ones, start to dry up.
Exactly. That reliance created a vulnerability that's now, well, being exposed. It really highlights the need for a funding model that's, more robust.
Okay, so that's the pressure cooker environment. How are universities actually responding on the ground? What's the impact inside the institutions?
Well, the responses are varied, but worrying. Voluntary redundancy schemes are widespread. Almost 40% of universities were using them in spring 2024, according to the debate.
Voluntary first, I suppose. But is it stopping there?
Doesn't seem like it. We're seeing impacts on what's actually taught. Nearly a third of universities are reducing module choices.
Fewer options for students.
Yes, and almost a quarter closing entire courses, which is pretty drastic.
Closing whole courses. And what about staffing more generally, beyond voluntary schemes?
The debate mentioned more aggressive tactics, too. Restructuring exercises, controversial fire and rehire approaches in some instances, and even closing whole departments. Kingston University's proposed closure of its humanities department got specific mention.
Closing humanities. That feels significant culturally, not just financially.
It really does. That example seemed to spark concern in the debate about losing vital disciplines, critical thinking, cultural understanding, the value we place on different subjects.
And it's not just academics, right? What about support staff?
Good point. The debate stressed the loss of crucial administrative and technical staff, too, the people who keep things running, support students, and research.
The often invisible workforce.
Absolutely. And another key point was that even universities currently making a surplus are still making cuts.
Really? Why would they do that?
It suggests a widespread fear about the future. They're anticipating tougher times ahead, even if they're okay right now. It points to a lack of confidence across the board.
That's unsettling. And was there any sense of which universities are being hit hardest?
Yes, the debate specifically mentioned that the post-1992 universities, often those serving more diverse student bodies, maybe from less privileged backgrounds, seem to be bearing the brunt disproportionately.
That raises serious questions about social mobility and access, doesn't it, if those institutions are under the most pressure?
It certainly does.
So if that's the impact on the institutions and staff, what about the students, the ones actually paying for this?
Well, the concerns there are pretty significant, too. The most obvious one is the potential hit to the quality of education. Fewer staff often means larger classes, less individual support, maybe fewer resources. The whole student experience could diminish.
And pressure on the remaining staff must be immense.
Bound to be. Increased workloads, which can impact teaching quality, research time, everything.
Plus, if courses are closing or options are reduced.
Exactly. Students might not be able to study what they want or need for their careers. And in places like Scotland, with capped places and rising applications, competition could get even tougher.
It sounds like a less appealing prospect all around. Did the debate touch on value for money?
Very much so. A pretty stark statistic was mentioned that maybe 1 in 5 graduates might actually be financially better off not having gone to university.
1 in 5. That really challenges the whole premise, doesn't it?
It forces a hard look at the return on investment, especially with rising student debt.
And what about the day-to-day reality for students while they're studying?
The cost of living crisis came up. Students, especially in expensive cities, having to work excessive hours just to get by.
Which must impact their studies.
Inevitably. It creates this really difficult environment, potentially undermining their academic success and, frankly, their well-being.
So the impact is felt right across the board, staff, students, institutions. But what about the wider picture? The UK, economy, society?
Yeah, the debate really emphasized that universities aren't just educational islands, they're massive economic players. The English HE sector alone contributes something like $95 billion to the UK economy. That's huge.
$95 billion.
And then think about industries like the creative sector generating $125 billion a year. They relied heavily on university-trained graduates.
You start cutting university capacity, and that pipeline gets squeezed.
Exactly. And universities are often major local employers, anchoring regional economies. Lancaster University was cited contributed £2 billion in 2021-22, much of it locally.
So job losses at a university ripple out into the local community.
Big time. And beyond the pure economics, there's the loss of expertise. If you cut jobs, close departments, you lose that accumulated knowledge. That could really damage future research, innovation
Yeah.
in STEM, arts, humanities across the board.
And it affects training for key public sector roles, too.
Yes, that was a specific concern raised. Things like training teachers, nurses, doctors. Worries were mentioned about cuts to clinical academics potentially hitting the future NHS workforce.
Wow, the connections are everywhere.
They are. And the potential closure of humanities departments, as we mentioned, was framed not just as an academic loss, but a loss to national culture, heritage, even global reputation.
And what about skills gaps? Things like degree apprenticeships.
Another risk highlighted. If universities shrink, can they maintain and grow things like degree apprenticeships, which are meant to be vital for plugging skills gaps? It casts doubt.
It really feels like pulling threads that could unravel quite a lot.
And don't forget the broader community role universities providing arts, sports, cultural events locally, that could diminish too.
Okay, so faced with all this rather bleak picture, what did the debate suggest in terms of solutions or ways forward? Was there any consensus?
Consensus is probably too strong a word, but several key themes emerged. There were calls for a proper review of university governance.
Governance. What specifically?
Questions about priorities. Have some universities focused too much on, say, big, shiny building projects rather than investing adequately in staff and students? That kind of thing.
Interesting. Looking inwards at how universities manage themselves.
Exactly. And unsurprisingly, a huge focus on funding models. A real push for something more sustainable than the heavy reliance on volatile international student fees.
Finding a more stable base. Makes sense.
There was also talk about potentially capping student numbers, maybe, to distribute resources more fairly across institutions. Controversial, perhaps, but it was raised.
And what about the international student situation? Reversing the visa changes.
Reevaluating those visa policies was definitely on the table. Understanding the full impact of what some called the hostile environment on attracting international talent.
And the perennial debate about tuition fees versus government funding.
Oh yes, that was central. Lots of differing views on how much students should pay versus how much direct public investment there should be. No easy answers there.
Were there any suggestions for immediate help? For universities really struggling now.
Yes, the idea of transitional funding came up. Sort of emergency support for those facing the most acute financial distress while longer-term fixes are worked out.
A financial sticking plaster, perhaps, while surgery is planned.
Something like that. And a general call for more transparency and accountability from university leaders in their financial planning. Building public trust.
What about other parts of the education system? Further education.
Briefly mentioned, yes, the role of FE colleges in the whole post-18 landscape, needing to see it as a connected system.
And the specific issues in Scotland.
They were highlighted to their different funding model, the cap on places, emphasizing that solutions might need to be tailored across the UK nations.
Any other specific points?
A call to review student loan eligibility, especially for non-UK nationals, and also concerns about quality control, particularly around franchise providers, where one institution delivers courses validated by another, ensuring quality remains high across the board.
So it's a real mix of potential actions funding, governance, policy changes, quality control, a complex web.
It really is. No single magic bullet, it seems. It'll require a lot of careful thought and probably difficult choices.
Okay, so just to wrap this up then, this deep dive into the parliamentary debate really paints a picture of UK universities under, well, intense financial strain.
Significant strain, leading to very real job losses, driven by that mix of squeezed tuition fees, rising costs, and crucially, that downturn in international students linked to Brexit and visa policies.
And the fallout is potentially huge, impacting staff morale and careers, student experience and value for money, and rippling out into the wider economy, innovation, public services, even our cultural landscape.
It touches so many areas.
So thinking about all that and just how vital universities are for the economy, for society, for individual opportunity, here's something to maybe ponder. What long-term solutions do you think are most crucial to make sure universities can survive and keep contributing positively to the UK's future?
It's a massive question, isn't it? So many different angles and potential answers to weigh up.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into a really critical issue facing the UK right now.
It was good to talk it through. A lot to consider.
As always, check out the transcript and episode notes for more information. Find us on social media at Bench Report UK. Remember to download the Bench Report wherever you get your podcasts. Take care.
Hello there, this is Tom, the producer of The Bench Report. Listener suggestions are vital to my mission of making politics more accessible and accountable. So, if you have an issue that's really important to you, personally or professionally, and want to know what those in power are doing about it, please get in touch via email or via our socials at Bench Report UK. I'll grab another coffee and start scanning those parliamentary archives.